Hello to you. South Korean officials believe North Korea has conducted another nuclear test in defiance of international sanctions. Reports suggest it may be Pyongyang's fifth and biggest test so far. A seismic event magnitude 5.3 has been recorded near North Korea's main test site in the northeast. South Korean experts believe the tremors were not a natural event. The North's nuclear ambitions are a major concern for the rest of the world, particularly for its neighbours. And Japan's Prime Minister has said if the test is confirmed, Tokyo will protest strongly to Pyongyang. The White House is monitoring the situation closely, we are told. Our correspondent Steve Evans is in the South Korean capital. Steve, information trickling out. There is more available now, I think.
South Korea is acting on the basis that the test happened, that it was a nuclear test. President Park has condemned it. She says that North Korea is on a road to self-destruction. The words of the condemnation you could almost cut and paste from the test back in January. So the South Korean government is working on the basis that that was a nuclear test, and there seems little doubt in my mind either. The question will be what now? It's likely that the UN Security Council will meet, as they did in January. There will be more condemnation, but sanctions were tightened pretty heavily back in January. President Park says that they will be tightened still further, but it's pretty obvious that it hasn't worked so far.
Yes,
on the military side, I was going to say on the military side, they're trying to determine whether the explosion was a hydrogen device. And that would be significant because hydrogen bombs, as opposed to orthodox bombs, nuclear bombs, Mike, offer much more explosive power for a small weight. And that's what nuclear bombs on the top of missiles is all about.
Yeah, sorry, Steve, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Just briefly, all this suggests that the various strategies for trying to limit the North's nuclear ambitions are not working. And China at the moment, North Korea's ally, is not likely to be helpful.
China will be helpful as far as it can be given the constraints, and the constraints are that it doesn't want that regime to collapse. But China is also bumping up against the US in the region. There are disputes over islands. China is in dispute with allies, US allies in the region. There was a less than cordial atmosphere, I thought, when President Obama was in China. So there are conflicts. China doesn't want a nuclear Pyongyang, but on the other hand, it doesn't want a unified North Korea if that, in effect, is a US ally.
Steve, thank you very much indeed for that. And let's just take you through the background on this. Now, North Korea has conducted 4 underground nuclear tests so far. In October 2006, Pyongyang announced its first nuclear explosion. Like all the subsequent tests, it was underground in tunnels dug into a remote mountainous site in the northeast. The second test in May 2009 was bigger, estimated yield 2 to 8 kilotons. North Korea said it achieved a higher level in terms of its explosive power and technology. In February 2013, unusual seismic activity again detected around the site. The North said it had tested a miniaturized and lighter nuclear device with greater explosive force than previously. And in January 2016, reports of an artificial quake in North Korea, magnitude about 5.1. That turned out to be evidence of a 4th test. Kim Jong-un later announced the first successful test of a hydrogen bomb. Well, Peter Hayes is from the Nautilus Institute for Security and Sustainability in Australia. Gave me this reaction just now to the event in the northeast of North Korea.
When I've actually been in North Korea during a real earthquake, so it is actually a seismically active part of the world, but this appears to be pinpointed to more or less the location of their nuclear test site, and the yield will be determined, of course, by collecting the data on the actual signature, the very precise signature that the seismic devices collect around the world, and by collecting the noble gases that are released, particularly xenon and krypton. And from that you can determine the yield, the type of weapon, is it a uranium or plutonium weapon, etc. And it's important to note that there's also a messaging rhythm in the North Korean test. Usually nuclear tests come after the United States and China have cooperated, as they did yesterday, on a UN Security Council resolution that condemns North Korea, whereas missile tests tend to be aimed more at China as it's about to cooperate with the United States. Well, we saw such 2 or 3 days ago, then we saw the UN vote, now we see the test. This is not that surprising.
So there are always political ramifications, of course. What's your best informed guess about what happened here and the significance of it?
Well, aside from the political aspects of the timing, which would always be very key to the North Korean leadership, there's always the ongoing technological imperative to actually figure out if these things work. Now, if it is a 5.3 scale event, that would indicate a fairly major improvement, in particular with a key technical problem, which is what's called the spherical implosive lens that go around the fissile material and actually makes it explode. It's been pretty clear to specialists that they hadn't solved that problem, which is why the yield has been so small in the past, usually down to 3 or 4, 5, maybe even less than 1 kilotons over their previous 4 tests. If this is a 20 to 30 kiloton test, they've probably solved that problem and they're off to the races with a plutonium weapon. But we still don't have enough detail yet to know that.
Just very briefly, Peter, if you don't mind, we're slightly short of time. It's going to be of concern, whatever it is, isn't it? Particularly to its near neighbours, South Korea and Japan.
Yes, I mean, it's one thing for them to have a crude nuclear device that they can explode in a hole in the ground in North Korea. It's a whole different ball of wax to then reduce this to the size that will go on a missile that can actually be lobbed at South Korea, Japan, or indeed the United States or even China. So it is very urgent, I think, to resume talks with the North Koreans and at least figure out a way to freeze, if not reverse gears with the North Korean nuclear weapons program. My own view and that of others who have negotiated with them in the past is that that's still possible, but it's very late in the piece, and President Obama should not sit on his hands and wait for the incoming president to undertake that task. It's simply too urgent. The stakes are too high in the Korean Peninsula.
Let me tell you about some breaking news right now. Fears that North Korea may have conducted a nuclear test, a magnitude 5.0 earthquake detected in the same location as 4 earlier tests, the most recent in January. South Korea says it believes the quake was artificial. CNN's Jim Sciutto joins us now by phone with more on that. Jim, what do you know about this?
Well, Don, you speak to U.S. officials. They say they haven't made a formal assessment yet, but I speak to folks in the military, and they say, listen, this has all the hallmarks of a nuclear test. One, the size of it, the readings they're getting from the South Korean military, but also the location. This earthquake, presumably artificial, taking place exactly or very close to exactly where the North Korea's last nuclear test took place. So that's the direction they're gone. And Don, just not to put too fine a point on it, but North Korea is now a nuclear power. This is a nightmare scenario that folks have been talking about for years, worried about, and successive administrations tried to prevent. And now this would be their 5th successful nuclear test. And keep in mind, it's the view of U.S. intelligence that they believe, or they believe they have to assume that North Korea now has the ability to put a nuclear device on the tip of a missile. And we see these missile tests all the time, every couple of weeks. It's a really alarming reality that we're facing here.
All right, Jim Sciutto with our breaking news. Jim, if you get more information, we'll get back to you. We appreciate that. We're going to continue on now and discuss politics. Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton doing battle on national security